This is the moment, that moment, whilst engaged in combat, that I first saw it. The facial expressions dancing across the face of your opponent. Engaged in mortal combat within a powerful storm, you feel something, your enemy's expressions reacting and contorting to every swing of the sword. This is the moment when I
Dude, I
first
was going a
understood
wee
what
bit
Ninja Theory
crazy.
was going for. This
Mm.
simple one-on-one skirmish explodes
Finally
with life
got myself
before your
positive
eyes,
that round
showcasing a level of raw
with ally.
emotion typically reserved for cutscenes. Yet here it is, in-game, reacting to the player. Hellblade 2 is already a game that's interesting from a technical
Dead.
standpoint. After
That
all,
was
it
a nice
takes
kill.
advantage of everything Unreal
Guess who
Engine
still doesn't
5
have
has
the
to offer.
ACR?
Lumen, Nanite, Virtual Shadow Maps, and more are all in full effect, and that is exciting. But it's in the heat of battle that I realize there's more to this presentation than just a basic list of engine features. There's
This
this
guy can
raw
commit
emotion
to the sniper.
underlying the entire experience, and this elevates the presentation to a new level. Yes, this is the same Hellblade 2 revealed as the very first Xbox Series X game way back in 2019. Nothing of the game even existed beyond the trailer at that moment, but it communicated a certain level of intent in the performance of its characters, and I'm happy to say that the final game lives up to this lofty objective. Hellblade 2 is an unusual, thought-provoking cinematic experience, boasting some of the highest quality real-time visuals we've ever seen, and that's what we're here to discuss today. So join me as we dig into the visual majesty of Hellblade 2.
What a nade.
As the name implies, Senua's Saga Hellblade 2 is intended as a direct sequel to the original Senua's Sacrifice. This
Yeah,
is
dude,
a
Melee
carefully
is
paced
hella viable in
cinematic
this game.
almost like the logical conclusion
Yep.
of those
Oh,
early
yeah, I've been
90s
starting to
FMV
play Melee a little bit.
experiments. I mean that in the best ways
Melee
possible,
a
though,
lot.
and I'm fascinated by its existence. In an era where it feels as if publishers are pushed to fill their games with arguably too many features and tons of busy work, Hellblade 2 is this tight, pure, cinematic experience that strives to deliver something a little different. And it's this singular focus that allows it to shine so brightly, becoming its own thing that you won't soon forget. Worth mentioning that it follows the structure and design of the original Hellblade very closely. Even with the increased scope of the subject matter, you will still spend a lot of time walking, taking in the scenery, and the various narrative beats. There are puzzles to solve and the occasional combat sequence, but by and large, this is an experience-driven game above all else. And as a story-focused game, the characters and character
They got
rendering
them lanes
play a
on
significant
lock.
role in presenting this narrative. However, while the pre-release
Glued
media largely
into that
focused on
scope.
Senua herself, much like the first game, Hellblade 2
Still?
features a surprisingly
You're
large
horrible.
number of other humans. There
Oh, I'm
are
horrible.
actual proper dialogue sequence and interactions with others in a way that we really didn't see much of in the original game. And this becomes one of the standout and defining visual features. The character rendering in Hellblade 2 sets new standards, delivering sequences that at times nearly resemble actual film sequences with real actors. It's
flamethrower.
that good. This is one of the first examples of a
Oh,
game that truly
Melee is
stands up against
crazy.
the promise of the original
I'm pretty
Unreal
sure it
Engine
does like
5
50 to
The
70
Matrix
damage.
Awakens demo, which should make sense as Hellblade, like The Matrix Awakens, leverages Epic's metahuman technology to help bring the characters to life, feel realistic and natural in a way that manages to largely sidestep the uncanny valley feeling you usually get from games like this. And when the camera zooms in for a close-up, the level of detail is astounding to the point that I was left guessing whether it was real-time graphics or simply a pre-rendered cutscene. Thankfully, photo mode is available at any time from the pause menu, allowing you to easily confirm that they are, in fact, real-time. Of course, it's how these characters are presented during gameplay that perhaps impressed me even more. As I said during the introduction, the expressions visible while engaged in combat, like in this scene, or just exploring, really help bring the characters to life. If you stop, zoom in photo mode, there's also plenty of detail to appreciate at close range. Look closely at her face here. The skin, the layers of dirt clogging her pores, light penetrating the top layer via subsurface scattering. the nearly perfect ambient and direct shadows. It's
Dude, this
superb.
flamethrower
Her
is
bloodshot
horrible.
eyes simulate the layer of viscous fluid protecting it with just the right amount of specular, while her iris exhibits actual proper depth. Then there's the fine details on her eyelashes, eyebrows, and beyond. If we rotate the camera here, you
Not
can
like
even
BO3.
appreciate the small grouping of hair spilling out from her headdress.
Dude, this guy is
There's
amazing.
really no question here. Hellblade 2 features one of the best depictions of a digital human we've ever seen in an interactive game. They managed to keep this illusion of very high levels of detail for every single human character in the game, and non-human for that matter.
He's insane.
This realism, however, is not achieved purely through the use of detailed, high polygon character models. After all, other engines and games are perfectly capable of such feats. We've seen it before. No, where Hellblade really shines comes from the usage of these tools on the art side. And a lot of that ties into the post-processing and other visual effects. Yes, I know, if you
We can
dip
do
into the
this,
options
Cafe.
menu, you won't find the option to disable things like chromatic aberration. And I get it, it's not always a popular effect, but hear me out on this. These effects were chosen with purpose, and I think they serve a very important role in defining the overall look of the game. The game attempts to simulate the use of an anamorphic lens with the expected focal effects that go along with it. As a result, there's this realism that genuinely gives you this feeling that what you're seeing has been filmed with a physical camera, at least to some degree. The use of film grain and chromatic aberration also work hand in hand to heighten the filmic
Kill
presentation.
streak.
Now,
6.
I know these aren't always popular in
yeah.
games, and the option to disable them would be nice for those that genuinely get a headache from seeing them, but I do feel that it's key to creating this soft analog-like presentation, and it's suitable
God.
for very specific games. It worked brilliantly in Alien Isolation, for instance, and it works very well here. It specifically lends the game this more naturalistic feel, something that extends to the PC version, by the way, even when running in much higher resolutions with things like DLAA. It's just intended to be a soft presentation, and I do think it works. And this soft presentation is just one of many things that kind of reminded me of the last generation's The Order 1886. Like The Order, this is a simple, straightforward affair that prioritizes narrative experience and presentation above all else. Both games rely on soft filmic image quality, and both are also way ahead of their time in terms of visual quality, I might argue. Also, like The Order, Hellblade 2 is presented using a wider aspect ratio, resulting in black bars on a 16:9 screen.
It's my Spider-Bot
And this is where talk of resolution comes into play. As reported pre-release, the final game presents in the 1296 to 1440p range, which, when factoring in the black bars, comes out to 964 to 1070p. This is when running on Xbox Series X, I should mention. We'll have more info on the Series S in a second video, but obviously it runs at a lower resolution. Playing Hellblade, though, recalls the musings of one Timothy Lotz, the inventor of FXAA, more than a decade ago, where there was this discussion over sharpness and high resolutions versus a lower resolution, more filmic, realistic, and high-end output that's more comparable to something like a Blu-ray movie. Hellblade is the sort of game that tries to answer such a question. And when you factor in all the various post-processing effects and the anamorphic simulation of the lens, I'm not so sure that adding more pixels really makes that much of a difference in terms of image quality. So yeah, the characters and camera-like presentation are, I would say, a success, and achieve the goal Ninja Theory set out for itself, but there's a lot more here as well. Hellblade 2 is one of the first Unreal Engine 5 games to ship, taking full advantage of everything the engine has promised, and it does feel like a genuine leap forward. So how does it actually manifest in game? Well, firstly, there's Lumen. Hellblade 2 is a game that relies primarily on natural lighting, split between sunlight, moonlight, and things such as fire or even magic. By and large, Hellblade is a very dark game, but there are some sequences that take place during the daytime, and Lumen allows very natural indirect and direct lighting for that matter. As the lighting is entirely real-time without a baked component, this allows the developers to pull off some rather fancy visual tricks. For instance, when there's a time jump, the game can simply pull the camera out, shift the position of the sun in real time, and continue on. Shadows and indirect lighting update accordingly, enhanced by the excellent volumetric cloud sim above. Now, we've seen time of day changes like this in other games before, but Lumen helps it feel much more cohesive and natural, I think. There's also sequences like this which produce huge bursts of light as you move through the world. You'll first encounter it in this camp, for instance, which has these blasts of fire illuminating the entire scene in a strikingly dramatic manner. That scene is bathed ever so briefly in the orange glow of fire below, and it just looks awesome. The same occurs later when you're asked to dash between pillars of safety as massive bursts of flame scorch the world around you in time with the music. Phenomenal stuff. But where Lumen really shines is in the more mundane. You know, the areas in a scene that one might not necessarily pay super close attention to while playing, but if it's wrong, it will stand out. It basically naturalizes the lighting in a way that just feels right. Like when you look below this wooden structure here, the area is occluded from the sun. Note how they become gradually darker with this very natural sort of shading and shadowing throughout the crevices. Stuff like this is really difficult to do with a fully real-time lighting system, but Lumen does a great job at tying the scene together here. Of course, it's also just a tool, really, so it's up to the artists themselves to use it effectively, which is exactly what they've done here in Hellblade 2. This, of course, highlights the power of using HDR. The game does look great in SDR, as you're seeing from this video, but when played on a suitable HDR display, the highlights so beautifully pierce the darkness in a way that truly delights the senses. But settings can be a little tricky depending on which type of display you're using. I tested it on two different OLED screens, an LG CX and an LG G4. With the increased capabilities of the G4, I found that the game plays best in HGIG mode, with a wonderful interplay between dim scenes and extremely bright highlights. On the CX, however, I found that I preferred dynamic tone mapping instead, as HGIG lowered the overall picture brightness enough that the highlights didn't really make up for it. So basically, try playing with the different settings and see what looks best to you. Lumen reflections are also used on shiny surfaces such as pools of water, though it does seem to be using the softer Lumen path here. Essentially, they layer screen space reflections on top of the Lumen reflections, which exhibit obvious SDF artifacts if you look closely.
What?
The only real issue with this configuration is that SSR can cause issues with certain dynamic objects, such as when you're carrying your torch through these sunken ruins. Note how it reflects awkwardly across the surface due to the use of SSR. What's neat though is that thanks to the fully real-time lighting, the photo mode even allows players to add lights into a scene and manipulate them in real time. Suddenly, photo mode behaves more like an actual film shoot where you can manually place key lights to get the best shots. So for most players, the nuts and bolts of Lumen really aren't that important. Rather, it's what it produces that matters, and I think that anyone just looking at the game in motion will be impressed by the way the scenes are lit, even if they do not understand the technical details. It just looks right to the eye, which is the power of ray tracing, which of course Lumen is a form of. Feeding into the lighting is the heavy reliance on environmental effects. For instance, the robust volumetrics are a standout, with many scenes exhibiting this low-hanging mist, smoke, and more. Ninja Theory expertly wields Unreal's volumetric fog system with additional fog materials designed to truly simulate the impression of swirling smoke and fog around the player. It's extremely effective in scenes like this. Look closely, the way the fog is illuminated with the fire is absolutely breathtaking and genuinely lends the scene this remarkable depth. You'll see these effects used across the entire game, with pockets of fog nested within the valleys and crevices. The fidelity of this effect is also kept impressively high, with minimal breakup and noise on Xbox Series X. But there are other environmental effects as well, such as the water, specifically the way the water interacts with environments throughout the game. This is evident right from the get-go, as the game begins with Senua as a prisoner on board this small ship during a storm at sea. Eventually you're washed up on the beach, and I immediately noticed the excellent visualization of waves crashing on the shore. Seriously, the effect of the water lapping up on shore is just stunning, I think. Rain droplets fall within this scene, beautifully capturing the feeling of existing within inclement weather. This mix of rain and volumetrics is absolutely stunning. But I was equally impressed by the game's stream system. No, not data streaming, I mean actual streams of water. Now, this is always a tricky thing to get right, but I feel that scenes with moving water really do capture the essence of flowing water. There's even a scene in which you drain a lake to reveal an underground passage, which just looks amazing in motion. And even basic pools of water can look pretty darn amazing in the right circumstances. Clearly, a lot of time and effort was poured into the visualization of water, and it does pay off. By now, though, you should have also picked up on another major benefit of Unreal Engine 5, Nanite. This virtualized geometry system is designed to allow extreme mesh density while virtually eliminating any signs of pop-in. That means as you move across the game's world, everything should remain stable without any visible asset draw-in or other distracting artifacts. That aspect by itself is very impressive and does contribute to the photorealism on display. This is extremely evident when transitioning between different scenes, as we saw earlier. As the camera swoops down from above, there is no visible pop-in at all within the entire scene, which is something you normally wouldn't see in a game at this scale. Nanite also helps the artist create these large-scale sequences with minimal repetition or tiling.
That's still a good
The
game.
assets themselves rely
Yeah.
on scanned photogrammetry assets, of course, based on various trips the team took during development, but the implementation is superb.
Yeah,
Interestingly, the
How long
location
are
choice
your
for this
downloads?
game is kind
it's kind of like all over the place. It's like not even halfway. And I think I'm lagging because of the download.
No worries.
I was just about to
Alright.
of a perfect match for that initial release of Unreal Engine 5. You remember that first demo, right? With all the rocks? Yeah, Hellblade does feature scenes with foliage, but a lot of the game world really feels like that initial tech demo, only seen through to completion as a shipping game. That's not to say everything here is flawless. The scenes look their best from the normal gameplay perspective, but if you stop and zoom in, you'll notice certain limitations in the raw assets at times. Things like these tree branches, for instance, do not hold up under close scrutiny. That's certainly not always the case though, but it is something you might notice when poking and prodding. Now, this isn't really a complaint per se, as it doesn't negatively affect what you see from the normal in-game camera. This is more a photo mode thing, so it's just kind of an observation. The technology here is not magic, basically, and we're still ultimately limited by manpower and time above anything else. Still, when dealing with all this dense geometry, shadows become even more important, and that's where the use of virtual shadow maps comes into play, another key UE5 feature. The idea behind VSM is to increase the resolution of shadows to the point that it can actually reflect the dense, fine geometry of nanite-driven scenes, as well as just character models in general. So if you zoom into small-scale objects, the game is able to retain that fine shadow detail without any of the usual issues we associate with shadow maps. You can see it on Senua's character model as well. If you zoom into the various bits and bobs in her outfit, they cast perfectly defined shadows. The key here is that VSMs are fully unified. All shadows are now handled in real time using this technique, so there's no more need for combining different types of shadows, which was often the case in Unreal Engine 4 titles. That's not to say shadow quality is always perfect. There are moments like this where you can see cracks in the VSM presentation, but by and large, it's very consistent and high quality throughout, and a key part of the visual design. The real magic, of course, stems from the combination of all these techniques by the game's artist. This isn't the first shipping game to use these features, but it is arguably the best looking example we've seen thus far. But this does come at a cost: frame rate. This topic is a little tricky regarding a game like this. So it has been known for a while, Hellblade 2 is indeed limited to 30 frames per second on Xbox consoles, and it does reach this target basically flawlessly in my experience. There's basically zero hiccups throughout. It runs at a flat 30 frames per second, and that's exactly what you're going to get from start to finish. So there is something to be said for perfect consistency and perfect frame pacing. However, the conversation around this target is a little more delicate and a matter of personal opinion. I've always felt that certain types of presentations can work well at 30 FPS, and Hellblade 2 is one of those games, but not everyone is going to be on board with this. But thankfully, there is a PC version as well, and it left me wondering just how far away from hitting 60 FPS on Xbox is this game?
Well, that's where I come in, with a bit of theory crafting based on our Frankenstein's console. We're going to be running the PC version of Hellblade 2 on a PC built from the AMD 4800S desktop kit, which is literally using the Xbox Series X CPU paired with 16 gigs of GDDR6 memory, just like the console, along with the Radeon RX 6700 10 gig and RDNA 2 GPU that performs very much like the PS5's GPU because architecturally it's very, very similar. And as we've seen in so many cross-platform comparisons, well, PS5's graphics power is close to Series X, so consider this like a ballpark PC build that should give us some idea if 60 FPS is possible on the Microsoft console. First up, some words of praise for the PC port. Begins with a shader pre-compilation step, which doesn't take too long and does seem to solve the usual PSO-based stutter struggle inherent to many Unreal Engine games. Next up, the menu screen is really very impressive. A wealth of options are available and field of view emission apart, pretty well featured I'd say. But here's what I really like. At any point in the game you can pause and tweak any settings in real time. Highlight a setting, engage the preview, and you can see exactly how the setting adjusts the scene.
What? You're not
Plus
dead?
you see the performance changes in real time too. It's really neat. Both CPU and GPU scores need to be below 16.7 milliseconds to sustain 60 frames per second. So we've got a very Xbox-like PC here, and we can set up its performance profile like Xbox is out of the box. We can set output resolution on our decidedly mid-range RX 6700 to output 3840 by 2160, 4K. Then we can set dynamic resolution scaling to target 30 FPS. I'm even able to stay at high settings here, and early work on settings comparisons to the console version. Well, we're seeing a mixture of medium and high so far in our testing, but I'm able to run flat out on high settings here. The end result is a game that looks just as fantastic as Xbox, if not more so, with very similar performance. But what about 60 FPS? For this testing, we can only really guess what Ninja Theory itself might try to do if it was so inclined to make a performance mode, but I settled on reducing output resolution to 1440p, moving the DRS target up to 60 frames per second and dropping down to medium settings, which should say still very attractive. Cutscenes can be challenging, dropping into the 50s and sometimes down into the 40s on the most demanding scenes. Gameplay, however, is in the high 50s and often at full 60 frames per second, and this is important as graphics quality settings and resolution are scalable, but CPU performance not so much. The 4800S desktop kit seems to deliver performance in line with a high-end Zen 1 CPU generally, occasionally encroaching into desktop Zen 2 levels. It doesn't have the cache or low latency of desktop Zen 2 chips, but even so, I don't think CPU performance is the problem in hitting 60 frames per second. And I do think on that regard, Series X could probably do it. Based on what we're seeing here though, maybe the dynamic resolution scaler just isn't responsive enough to consistently hit 60 frames per second. Or maybe the lower bounds just isn't low enough. Everything does seem to work a treat at 30 FPS though, at least on this particular GPU. However, there is another problem, traversal stutter. Here I'm comparing runs on my 60 FPS profile against my maxed out 4K
Dude,
DRS
can we
30
fucking do
FPS
something
capture.
about these?
At the same point every time you see a stutter like this. Frame times leap to a max 140 milliseconds, an annoying pause at 30 FPS, but a massive glitch at 60. It's not a great look for the PC version, but might possibly be improved by a faster CPU. But here's the thing. If we run this sequence on Xbox Series X, it runs at a totally consistent 30 frames per second. No traversal stutter. So let the velocity architecture theories begin now. But here's an intriguing final test. Here I'm using medium settings but with high LOD, high textures and high foliage, which are settings that are confirmed on Series X. Whether I'm at 1080p, 1440p or 4K output, no 60 FPS here. I think the lower bounds on dynamic res is identical for all resolutions, hence the very similar frame rate readout despite very different target resolutions. So the PC version is pretty good, I'd say, based on these first impressions, and we'll have more on this in the fullness of time on more conventional rigs. But for now, I'd say that 60 FPS is theoretically possible on Series X with reduced resolution and effects. But as for a stable 60 FPS, well, that's another thing. Resolution may need to drop very, very low for consistency. And meanwhile, well, I agree with John basically. Play the game and you'll see that 60 FPS is what you might call a nice to have, but 30 FPS is just fine for this type of experience. Still, the option is there for PC along with so much more. More soon on this game, but for now, back to John.
Thanks, Rich, but as you know, there's more to the presentation than just the visuals. Audio plays just as large a role, specifically in Hellblade 2, and it takes a very different approach compared to most other games. You see, one of the key elements of this game are the voices Senua hears throughout. The manifestation of psychosis, really.
He died because of them. Do you remember? They took him from you. You're Dillian. They killed him.
To that end, like the original, Ninja Theory relies on binaural audio and suggests playing the game in headphones. While the home theater experience is indeed still excellent, the effect definitely works best with headphones. Reason being, the idea of binaural audio is to simulate the physical characteristics of our ears and the way sound enters the ear canal. By duplicating this via recording with something like a head mic or using another technique, it creates that illusion. It really simulates the way your ears work. The way this is leveraged for Hellblade, though, means that as the voices speak to the player through the headphones,
Dude,
it
no way.
genuinely
Can we
gives
please
the
not lose
impression that
this?
there is someone directly whispering in
Holy
your
shit.
ears and around your head.
You did it, Senna.
Now people will be free again.
I wanna be on
Lord, yes.
You think you have triumphed, but this means nothing. This woman
Let's
was
just hold
no
B with our
god.
lives.
She was weak, like you. This changes nothing.
I need to go home.
It's incredibly engaging. But of course, the overall audio presentation is as well. Here's one example. The haunting chants and rising of the music in this part really showcase what I mean.
No.
Optic.
Come on.
Optic.
No, that was so close. Jesus Christ. What more can we do for our team? Jesus Christ.
Butchering. Slaughtering. I thought it couldn't get any worse.
So yeah, when it comes to presentation, it's clear that Hellblade 2 stands among the best looking games ever created. It's a great fusion of UE5 and Ninja Theory's talented art team. Everything about the presentation feels polished to perfection. The thing about this presentation, though,
Bless you.
is we've seen
Okay.
it before,
I think
sort
that
of,
might be my
in prior
last, though.
demos. Now, we know the original 2019 trailer
Alrighty,
does
y'all.
not represent the
You guys
in-game
have a good
visuals,
night.
but the
You as
gameplay
well.
reveal trailer that occurred
Nice
later
talking to you
does
after
exist
so
in
long,
the final
Sean.
game. You know, the one
Oh yeah. Hello?
You as well. So, yep,
Hello?
I'm here. Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. My game can be done like in 2 minutes, I guess.
All right. I mean, it's 2:30 for me, so I might not be up,
Oh, that's okay.
honestly, because it's super late. I'll be on tomorrow though.
All right, man. Sounds good. I'll be around too.
Do you work tomorrow, Sean?
Yeah, but I'll be on at nighttime.
No, well, I won't because I go in at nighttime.
Oh shit. Never mind.
Yeah, just tomorrow and the day after I do at least.
Okay.
Yeah, no worries. We'll catch each other. I'm here like every day, so
All right, man. I'll keep an eye out.
coolio. All right, Sean. I will talk to you later.
Adios.
with the giant encounter in the cave. Well, comparing the two side by side, I noticed some changes right away. Things like color grading, the weather conditions, and the overall look of the scene. It looks great in both cases, just a little different. This is true both inside and outside the cave. I was not able to get a perfect lineup here because there are some differences in the way the camera FOV is handled, along with changes to animation. As the giant begins crawling into the cave, however, it's at this point that the animation does actually line up almost perfectly, suggesting the scene was animated a while ago, and they were happy with the results, which I agree are very good. Now at this point, the people surrounding the giant are readying their attack, and I did notice a difference in how the torches are represented. The lens effects are less pronounced in the demo. There's no flare around the fire. Then watch as the giant is lit on fire. First, let's look at the final game. It's a pretty cool effect, I think. It looks great, but if we bring the demo in, I did notice that the flame seemed to boast smoother overall animation, while the intensity of the flame itself has been ramped up to pure white. So they definitely made some changes here. I do love the way the smoke fills the scene though after that initial attack. It's very atmospheric and evocative. But then we see the flames emerge once again, and I still think it looks great in the final game, but the fluidity of that demo is even more visible here. Thankfully, this is, in my opinion, the only real noticeable loss in terms of rendering quality. Everything else is basically a sidestep, where the result looks amazing, even if a little different from the original demo, which is nice to see. Ninja Theory clearly reached their goal in terms of building a world-class presentation. I can say that much. It's an interesting release in the sense that the team decided to focus in on this very narrow experience while delivering it at the highest possible fidelity. Basically, Hellblade 2 is less of a typical game and more of something that washes over you. It's a style of release not unlike Cyan's original Manhole from the 80s. Even back then, arguments about over what was a game and what wasn't continued, and however you feel about that topic, I do think it's a journey worth taking. I've been thinking about this, and I think the reason it doesn't resonate with some folks may come down to expectations and simply preference. Hellblade 2 is a story-driven experience, more than one might think of as a typical video game. But this style of experience has existed for a while now. This type of narrative-driven game is very common in the indie space, but it's unusual to see it in the AAA space, which makes Hellblade 2 rather unique. But this starts to get into what makes something more of a narrative game versus an actual action game. I think it comes down to what sort of control is provided to the player and how that factors into the experience. For instance, the input. There's a lot of scenes throughout this game where you'll push up to climb a cliff or simply walk forward, but in reality you push up, watch an animation play out, and then when that animation stops, you can push up again to continue. So you're not really actively climbing, you're just triggering a series of animations. And it's kind of the same in combat. Basically, every encounter is a series of one-on-one face-offs. You attack, parry, and dodge. But when you've drained enough life from that specific enemy, the game switches to a canned animation that finishes him off before bringing in the next enemy. It looks incredible during these moments, but it's a very simplistic design. But I think that's okay. It actually works really well and manages to feel surprisingly visceral. They're not trying to make a deep combat game here. And frankly, I think it's great that such an experience can be made at this level of fidelity. Whether it's for you or not is up to the individual, but what's here has been executed perfectly, which I think deserves kudos. Ninja Theory has made one of the most technically accomplished examples of real-time graphics in a game that we've seen to date. Which is why, given its availability on services such as Game Pass, I think everyone should at least give it a look. I admit the introduction is very slow, and it did not initially work for me, but in time I found myself drawn into this world, and I really enjoyed the overall experience. And hopefully you enjoyed this video here, because we've reached the end. So, let us know what you think of Hellblade 2, and we'll see you next time.
Like 1 or 2 matches of this, and I'm gonna go to bed. I am. Wait, Ubisoft, nobody cares. Everybody hates you. Hey, Ubisoft original. Hey, look, we did something. Look at us. Okay. What AA does it use? I'm really concerned I can't choose. What? There's no AA option. What the hell? Is this for real?
Ah, the new loadout smell. Allies capturing Zone B. Zone's ours. Our crew's moving on Zone A. Take all the zones. Dominate them. Capture zone contested. They're on Zone B. Light them up. Friendly's moving on Zone C.
I'm in bad shape. Fire up high.
What? I died like in 2 seconds. What the fuck was that? That mouse problem's not an issue anymore. The game was in beta.
They're on Zone B. Light them up.
Got that napalm you requested. Activate the prox fight.
What the fuck was that, dude? Frag grenade. He just like dropped down the frag grenade? No.
Capture zone contested. Trespassers on Zone A. Friendlies moving on Zone C. Payback. All right.
intel.
Set the prox.
Troops moving on Zone A. Scumbags on Zone C. Burn them out. We got it. They're on Zone B. Light them up. Capture zone contested.
Help! I'm dying here. Activate the prox fight.
I need it for hostiles.
Zone up for grabs.
I'm in bad shape.
Crews moving on B. When things get tough, remember your training. Apply the fire to the bad guys. Zone's ours. Zone up for grabs. B's getting blitzed. C is in danger. This is looking good. Our crew's in the... Take all the zones, then keep them. That's the work order. We're claiming a...
That napalm you requested.
That's off that gun. Zone up for grabs.
Help! I'm dying here.
They're taking B. Finish line in sight. Your crew's into a big win. Allies all over B.
Fire up high! Send a box!
First, ready to go. Allies taking A. You and your crew got the job done. Occupy. It's like King of the Hill, but without the hill. 3, 2, 1. Take the capture zone. Don't let nobody in, ain't one of you. That guy's on the zone. Cleaning house.
Fire up high!
Capture zone on the move. We're in the zone.
What? Sniper rifle.
Okay, that happened.
Wow,
Now
dude.
dust yourself
That's
off and
fucking
go
stupid.
burn those trucks.
Got that main cover requested!
Well, we're gonna get rumble stomped here, I can already tell.
They're taking the zone.
They're just like traveling together, like
Capture zone
that's
is changing location.
first thing I'm noticing. No way I lost that fight, dude. Why did I do that?
Bad guys on the zone.
Active camo!
Capture zone on the move. They're taking the zone. Capture zone contested. They're taking the zone.
Wow, that's horrible.
I'm in bad shape.
We're in the zone. Capture zone contested. We're capturing.
Using flashback! Right out! Reloading!
Capture zone contested.
Swapping!
They're taking the zone.
Ah,
Capture zone on the move.
Going dark! Is revenge.
We're taking the zone.
Reloading!
nice.
Changing battles! Refreshing.
Chucking grenade.
Taking the zone.
I'm in bad shape.
Capture zone contested. The capture zone is changing location.
Right out!
Help! I'm dying.
Look out. Enemy survived doing that seats to his walls thing again. They're taking the zone. Got him back.
Reload.
Capture zone on the move.
Fire up high.
What did he do to me, dude? He hit right on top of me. What an asshole.
Bad guys on the zone. We're taking the zone. You ain't doing so good, pal. Time to roll up your sleeves. Home front ready. They're on the zone. Capture zone contested. Zone's moving. Own that capture zone. We're taking the zone.
Maybe I should aim down sights in those encounters. I thought, like, what's... Oh, it's like horrible,
Enemy
dude.
showing out, goggles
Fire
active.
is like absolutely worthless.
It wasn't bad.
Frag out!
Home front ready to go. Capture zone contested.
Best revenge is revenge.
Oh my god, we can win this. We can win.
They're taking the zone.
What is this?
I'm in bad shape.
They're taking the zone. They're capturing. Zone's moving.
What is that angle, dude? What?
They're taking the zone. It ain't over till it's over. But I'm
Grenades
pretty
away.
sure it's all over for your crew.
Reload. Fire up high.
Capture zone contested. Oh, back. Capture zone's moving. We're taking the zone.
Like how they didn't even like launch, dude. That's so AIDS. I died.
They're in the zone. They're on the zone.
Keep it out of shape.
You lost. And yeah, I'm mad about
Wasn't
it.
such a bad loss, actually. I should go to bed. Let's go to bed. God damn it, I'm too late. Oh. I can still leave. Yeah, it's time for bed for me. Enough gaming for the night. Good night.